Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We got a nice little broadcast for you today. First, I'll be presenting the news as always, and then we'll get our report from Mr. German Aid to Ukraine as we do. Then we'll open it up to some Q&A. So yeah, it should be pretty tight broadcast. Might have some other people stopping by. We'll see. I think please do hit that like button down there. It really does help us out. YouTube is very, the word I'll use is capricious with old Tochnyi. We seem to randomly get flagged as like, this is not appropriate, spicy content. And a lot of the videos that get flagged are like maps, right? And then sometimes we show like, explosions like a lot of news agencies do here on YouTube, and they're fine. So we have a hard time understanding, but all that to say, YouTube doesn't super like the topic that we cover. And even though we try to be professional, we have policies about what we show you guys and stuff like that. We've tried to be professional and reasonable and responsible with the good people at YouTube. Sometimes they manually review our videos of maps or talking about the Russian economy, and they say, this isn't appropriate for all advertisers. So we don't really care about advertising revenue, but the way YouTube works, unless we're working our little butts off to make them money, they're not going to promote our little video, right? And what we're trying to do here is reach people about what's going on in Ukraine and give them good quality information. So we kind of rely on you guys. Like, YouTube's not going to do us any favors because of how they feel about our work. So we really appreciate you guys promoting our work outside on other social media platforms, and also just liking and subscribing and all that. Like, that kind of helps cut through that algorithm bias that we have against us. So we really appreciate your guys' support. Like, it's all because of you. Like, YouTube's not helping us any. So any success we have is purely because you guys put your weight behind us and say, no, YouTube, you're wrong about those Tochnyi kids. So we really appreciate it. Thanks so much for liking our content, subscribing, all the stuff you guys do to promote our work and the work of all the great researchers at Tochnyi. I personally, and I think Erlen too, and I assume Mr. German Aid to Ukraine, like, I don't really care that they're like suppressing my work, but there's so many great researchers at Tochnyi, and it bothers me that YouTube has decided their work should be suppressed. So thank you guys so much. It means a lot to me personally that you guys do your best to offset that bias against us. So thanks. So with that, without any further delay, I was really being a bit sappy there for a moment. I will now report the news.
Here are the main headlines as of January 5th, 2025. On the evening of December 31st, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, in collaboration with the country's drone units and other defense components, targeted Vartsevskaya oil depot in Russia's Smolensk region. This operation resulted in significant explosions and a fire at the site, producing heavy smoke and reportedly igniting fuel storage tanks. The Ukrainian military's general staff shared the details via social media, emphasizing the depot's strategic role in supplying the Russian military. Videos from the incident corroborate reports of the blaze, although specific information on the extent of the damage remains under review. On January 4th, a significant drone attack targeted Ust-Luga at Russia's largest seaport, located in the Leningrad region. Ust-Luga holds a critical position for Russia in its war efforts and its broader geopolitical strategy. The port has become an important logistics hub for bypassing Western sanctions, facilitating the export of key resources such as oil, gas, and coal. Revenues generated from these exports are reportedly used to fund military operations. Moreover, the port plays a significant role in militarizing the Baltic region and serves as a docking point for Russia's Shadow Fleet. Strategically located along the Baltic Sea, Ust-Luga allows Russia to maintain a naval presence in the region while ensuring the continued movement of military-related cargo. The port also functions as an alternative to European trade routes, which Russia can no longer access due to sanctions. It has become the primary gateway for exports to Asian markets, including China and India. On December 31st, 2024, Ukrainian special forces achieved a significant milestone in military operations by successfully destroying 2 Russian Mi-8 helicopters using advanced Magara V-5C drones armed with missile weaponry. The groundbreaking achievement, the first of its kind in military history, was reported by Ukraine's main intelligence agency. The operation took place in the Black Sea near the Crimean Peninsula, which remains under temporary Russian occupation. It was conducted by Group 13 of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and the attack resulted in the complete destruction of the 2 helicopters. Preliminary reports indicate that the crews aboard the aircraft were also neutralized. On the evening of January 1st, multiple airports across Russia experienced temporary flight suspensions following what Russia's Defense Ministry described as a coordinated attack by Ukrainian drones. The affected airports included those in Kaluga, Penza, Saransk, and Saratov, with restrictions implemented for security reasons. Russia's defense ministry claimed that air defense systems intercepted 19 drones during the attacks, which occurred between 5:30 p.m. and 8 p.m. Moscow time. The reported targets included Belgorod Oblast, Kursk Oblast, and Voronezh, Bryansk, and Rostov Oblasts. The Federal Air Transport Agency confirmed the temporary closure of the 4 airports, citing safety measures. Social media reports and Russian Telegram channels linked the flight restrictions directly to the drone attacks, although official sources have not provided any further details about damage or casualties. Ukraine's military intelligence successfully carried out a cyber attack on January 4th, targeting Region Transservice LLC, a critical service provider for Russian railways. The operation, coinciding with the birthday of Kirill Budanov, the head of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, significantly disrupted the company's infrastructure, destroying 78 servers, 211 workstations, and their backup systems, according to reports from intelligence sources. Region Transservice plays a crucial role in maintaining the life cycle of freight cars within Russia's railway network, including maintenance and disposal. Its involvement in transporting military cargo makes it a strategically important asset for the invasion. This strike follows a similar cyber operation conducted days earlier against Lukoil, a major player in Russia's oil industry, which is also linked directly to military supply chains. On December 28th, Italy's National Cybersecurity Agency, ACN, reported a series of DDoS cyber attacks targeting the nation's transportation and diplomatic infrastructure. The pro-Russian hacker group NoName057 claimed responsibility for these incidents through their Telegram channel. The attacks coincided with Italy's announcement of extended military aid to Ukraine through 2025. Identifying themselves as activists aligned with Russian interests, the group has a history of collaborating with other ideologically driven hackers to disrupt European systems in protest of Western support for Ukraine. The attacks began at approximately 8 a.m. local time and temporarily disrupted the websites of key transportation hubs, including Milan Malpensa and Milan Linate airports, as well as Italy's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. While the websites were briefly inaccessible, ACN confirmed that flight operations and critical systems were not impacted. The Italian intelligence service stated that the attacks were limited to public websites and did not compromise flight control systems, airline operations, or customer applications. The French Ministry of Defense has refrained from commenting on the situation surrounding Ukraine's 155th Anna of Kyiv Separate Mechanized Brigade, which is reportedly facing personnel losses and equipment shortages. The Ukrainian State Bureau of Investigation has initiated an inquiry into the matter, according to reports by Suspilne. The brigade has been stationed in Donetsk Oblast, particularly near Pokrovsk, which has been a key target for Russia's ground forces in recent months. Journalist Yuri Butusov shared details on Facebook revealing significant organizational issues with the brigade. He noted that of the 1,924 service members who underwent training in France in October, the majority had limited experience. Only 51 soldiers had served more than a year, 459 had less than a year of service, and 1,414 had under 2 months. Additionally, around 150 soldiers were sent to France for training without completing their basic training. The brigade's leadership, under the command of Dmytro Ryumshin, faced criticism when around 50 soldiers deserted during their time in France, attributed to poor management of personnel. This led to the dismissal of the commander and several other senior officers. The new leadership was unfamiliar with the brigade's unique challenges and further complicated the situation. Between September and November, the brigade was reinforced with around 4,000 new recruits, many of whom had not undergone screening, and their training concluded in November. In early December, prior to the brigade's combat operations, there were 198 instances of unauthorized absences, and personnel losses grew as operations began, attributed to poor organization and inadequate preparation. Budanov also stated that the brigade lacked essential equipment, including drones and electronic warfare systems, and had received faulty mortars. In response to the situation, the investigative agency confirmed that they will investigate the reports of abuse of power and desertion under Ukrainian criminal law, and that the investigation is currently ongoing. The French Ministry of Defense, in comments to Radio Svoboda, acknowledged that it trained and equipped a Ukrainian brigade of approximately 2,000 personnel for combined arms operations in the latter half of 2024. They clarified that the training was conducted using French equipment, which was meant for transfer to Ukraine, with soldiers returning to Ukraine with the equipment. However, the ministry declined to comment on the specifics of the investigation, noting that the Ukrainian armed forces were responsible for selecting personnel and managing how they're deployed. Up next, we have economy and aid. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has announced a $3.4 billion aid package in direct budgetary support to Ukraine. Yellen emphasized that the latest budgetary support is vital for Ukraine's ability to maintain critical services and continue its defense efforts. The aid package is coordinated with USAID and the State Department and marks the final allocation under the bipartisan Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2024. Yellen stressed that U.S. economic aid is not only key to Ukraine's resistance, but also critical for achieving a just peace. The Treasury Department clarified that the support comes with conditions aimed at strengthening Ukraine's governance. These include reforms to enhance transparency, improve law enforcement, and reinforce anti-corruption measures, ensuring that funds are utilized efficiently and effectively. Ukraine has unveiled a new drone-based counter-drone system called Winchester, featuring twin shotguns designed to intercept enemy drones. The system expands Ukraine's existing counter-drone capabilities, which includes FPV drone interceptors and specialized drone-deployed nets for use in capturing adversarial drones. The Winchester system's use of shotgun armament introduces a novel approach to drone interception. The dual shotguns fire pellet rounds with a spread pattern, enhancing the likelihood of hitting fast-moving drone targets. While shotgun pellets lack the stopping power of rifle rounds, the configuration is particularly effective for counter-drone operations, as drones are often lightweight and susceptible to minimal damage. Engineers at Medinvest, Ukraine's largest steel producer, have developed specialized armored protection for the control module of the Patriot air defense system. The company announced this on January 3rd and stated that the newly developed armor, crafted from Ukrainian steel, is designed to safeguard both the system's control module and its operators. Alexander Mironenko, Medinvest Group's COO, explained that the project was completed within 6 weeks and features a shield made of armor steel plates up to 8 millimeters thick. The entire structure weighs around 2.6 tons and comprises around 200 components, ensuring robust protection without compromising the system's mobility or operational effectiveness. Medinvest has produced steel armor for various tanks, including the T-64, T-72, the U.S.-made M1 Abrams, and the Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. Preparations are also underway to integrate shields into the Leopard 2 tank variants. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed into law a bill granting exemption from military conscription to citizens who have lost close relatives or have relatives missing as a result of the war. The legislation is identified as Bill number 12104 and aims to provide legal clarity on deferrals during the ongoing war. The law introduces amendments to Article 23 of Ukraine's legislation on mobilization, preparation, and execution. It specifies that both men and women whose close relatives have died or gone missing are exempt from being conscripted in the special mobilization period. Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin has approved a decree prohibiting prisoners who enlist in the military under contracts with the Defense Ministry from receiving one-time enlistment bonuses. According to the directive, individuals serving prison sentences at the time of the signing of their military contracts will no longer qualify for these monetary payments. The policy came into effect on January 1st. Previously, President Vladimir Putin authorized one-time payments for those enlisting with the Defense Ministry in November 2022. In July 2024, the payment amount was raised to 400,000 rubles, which is approximately $3,500 US, to incentivize recruitment efforts during the war. However, the new decree specifically excludes incarcerated individuals from accessing the benefit. A Russian court has mandated that Yandex, the country's leading technology company, remove public access to maps and images of a specific oil refinery. The ruling stems from concerns about the visibility of strategically important defense facilities during wartime, as reported by the Russian news agency TASS based on court documents. While the refinery's name remains undisclosed, it has reportedly been targeted by drones 4 times in 2024, resulting in infrastructure damage and injuries to workers. The facility is described as operating continuously to meet the demands of Russia's army and navy. The court ordered Yandex to obscure or remove visual data related to the refinery, including workshops, compressor stations, tank sites, and other key components from its mapping services within 1 month. The company was also charged with a state duty as part of the decision. The legal action follows an inspection by a supervisory agency that revealed sensitive information about the refinery was publicly accessible through Yandex's services. The agency argued that this exposure compromised the defense capabilities of the state and posed risk to the timely supply of critical resources to the Russian military. During the court proceedings, Yandex contested the claims, but the court ultimately sided with the agency. It concluded that leaving such information accessible could jeopardize national security and the safety of employees at the facility. This marks the first time a Russian multinational technology company has been legally compelled to remove publicly available information about a defense-related facility in Russia. The ruling is not yet final and may be appealed to a higher court. Oil production and refining in Russia have dropped to their lowest levels in over a decade, driven by disruptions from Ukrainian attacks, unscheduled maintenance, and government policies. By the end of 2024, oil refining at Russian facilities is projected to reach 266.9 million tons, marking a 12-year low. Meanwhile, daily crude oil production has fallen to 1,254,000 tons, a level not seen since 2005. The new figures were reported by the Moscow Times from the analytical service Ciala. In Tuapse, there was a 60% drop in output, and in Novoshakhtinsk, there was a 31% drop in output. Despite these setbacks, some refineries, such as those in Omsk, Akchinsk, and Bashkira, have increased their utilization rates to offset production losses. However, so far these efforts have not fully mitigated the broader downturn. The Russian government has sought to regulate fuel prices for households, which has reduced margins for oil companies and has limited their ability to offset their rising costs. Even so, retail gasoline prices jumped by 11% in 2024, the sharpest increase in 13 years, reaching 60 rubles per liter. This marked a significant departure from prior years where price hikes were closer to or below inflation levels. The rise is attributed to oil companies attempting to pass repair and operational costs on to consumers, despite government intervention to the contrary. Russia's crude oil and gas condensate production has also hit a 13-year low, averaging 1,428,000 tons per day, the lowest rate since 2011. The production challenges are also a result of ongoing sanctions from the EU, US, and UK, which aim to limit Russia's energy revenues. Oil from 2 aging Russian tankers damaged in a storm has reached the shores of Sevastopol in annexed Crimea, according to local authorities. The incident, which President Vladimir Putin called an ecological disaster, involved the Volga-Neft 212 and the Volga-Neft 239 tankers, which were struck by a storm on December 15th in the Kerch Strait. The vessels were carrying 9,200 tons of heavy fuel oil, with an estimated 40% spilling into the sea. Sevastopol's Russian-appointed governor, Mikhail Razbozhayev, reported that a small oil slick had reached the area, describing it as approximately 1.5 meters in width and length. He also shared footage of the thick oil floating near the shore. The oil involved, M100 grade mazout, represents significant cleanup challenges due to its significant density, which causes it to sink below the water's surface. The Russian Transportation Ministry stated that no proven technology exists globally for effectively removing this type of oil from the water column. Cleanup efforts are currently focused on recovering the oil that has washed ashore. Volunteers have been playing a crucial role as official responses have been criticized for their limitations. To date, 78,000 tons of contaminated sand and soil have been removed from the beaches in Crimea and southern Russia. The Russian Emergency Situations Ministry estimates that total cleanup requirements could reach 200,000 tons. In the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine's Luhansk region, access to the internet for the local population is being increasingly restricted by occupying forces. Artem Lizahor, the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, reported the developments via Telegram. Lisa Hoare highlighted that the residents in the Severodonetsk area were previously cut off from direct internet access. To go online, they were forced to travel to nearby settlements along the motorway to Luhansk. Their public spaces, like stores, offered limited internet access, where residents could purchase Wi-Fi passwords to connect and contact relatives. Recent reports indicate that Russian security forces have begun issuing warnings to operators of these establishments. Lisa Hoare warned that further restrictions are expected, including the complete disconnection of internet services in the area. This follows earlier actions by the occupiers in the Severodonetsk area, where mobile signals are being actively jammed even in remote locations. These measures appear to be part of a broader strategy by the occupying forces to control communication and limit access to information for residents in the temporarily occupied Luhansk region. Up next is foreign relations. Starting January 1st, Azerbaijan is imposing new restrictions on the duration of Russian citizens' stay in the country without a visa, limiting their stay to 90 days per calendar year. The decision mirrors recent changes in Russia, which reduced the permissible stay for foreign nationals in the same time frame. Azerbaijan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs emphasized that the decision was made on the principle of reciprocity. This decision comes amid heightened tensions between Azerbaijan and Russia following the downing of an Azerbaijan Airlines plane, which I reported on last week on September 25th, which crash-landed in Kazakhstan, killing 38 of the 67 people on board. The incident has sparked a diplomatic rift, with Azerbaijan accusing Russia of firing an air defense missile at the plane as it approached Grozny airport. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev has demanded accountability and compensation from Moscow, alleging that Russia has tried to obscure the cause of the crash by offering conflicting explanations. While the Russian president expressed regret over the incident in a phone call with Aliyev, he stopped short of admitting responsibility. The Russian Investigative Committee has opened a criminal inquiry, and Kazakhstan, where the crash occurred, announced that the black box would be sent to Brazil for a neutral analysis. The decision to involve Brazil, where the aircraft was manufactured, aligns with Azerbaijan's call for a transparent investigation and complies with international aviation protocols. The crash also prompted additional scrutiny of Russian aviation safety and strained relations with its partners. Airlines, including Israel's El Al, have temporarily suspended flights to Moscow over safety concerns. The incident has also intensified criticism of Russia's air defense systems and operational protocols, with Azerbaijan accusing Moscow of attempting to cover up the missile strike. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reviewed a report from Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha and Agriculture Minister Vitaly Koval concerning their recent visit to Damascus. The discussions focused on security, economic collaboration, and humanitarian initiatives aimed at stabilizing Syria. Zelensky emphasized Ukraine's commitment to supporting efforts that contribute to stability in the Middle East, which he believes will foster greater peace and trade opportunities for all involved. One key outcome of the talks is the establishment of the Grain from Ukraine program. The initiative aims to enhance cooperation with Syrian authorities and international partners, including European nations and the United States, to provide humanitarian aid and strengthen logistics for grain supplies. The program will operate in conjunction with the UN World Food Program, which recently facilitated the shipment of 500 tons of Ukrainian wheat flour to Syria. During the December 30th visit, Foreign Minister Sybiha met with Syria's de facto leader, Ahmed al-Sara, and the newly appointed Foreign Minister, Assad Hassan al-Shaibani, to discuss trade, logistics, and humanitarian efforts. Slovakia's state electricity grid operator SEPS has confirmed that it will maintain electricity exports to Ukraine despite recent threats from Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico to cut supplies. SEPS assured the Czech news agency CTK on January 3rd that it remains committed to honoring its contracts with Ukrenergo, Ukraine's state electricity transmission operator. The issue arose as a result of Kyiv's decision to cease the transit of Russian gas to Slovakia as of January 1, 2025, as part of broader efforts to reduce reliance on Russian energy infrastructure. Prime Minister Fico has expressed dissatisfaction with the decision, warning of potential retaliatory measures, including cutting backup electricity supplies to Ukraine. Fico has also raised the matter with European Council President Antonio Costa and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, criticizing Ukraine's refusal to continue gas transit beyond 2024. Despite these political disagreements, SEPS has reiterated its commitment to fulfilling its obligations under existing agreements, ensuring that electricity will flow to Ukraine and won't be interrupted. Polish farmers staged a protest in Warsaw on January 3rd, opposing agricultural imports from Ukraine and EU policies which they believe are endangering their livelihoods. Organized under the banner of 5 times Stop, the demonstration targeted several issues, including Ukrainian imports, the EU's trade deal with the Mercosur bloc, which is, I think, in South America, the Green Deal, forest and hunting policies, and the perceived economic decline in Poland. The event coincided with the inauguration of Poland's presidency of the Council of the EU, which amplified the protesters' demands. The demonstration began in front of the European Commission Representation Building in Warsaw at 2 p.m. local time, followed by a march through the city. The protest was organized by various agricultural groups and was scheduled to conclude at 11 p.m. Tomasz Obzanski, chairman of the independent farmers' trade union Solidarność, criticized EU policies for undermining Polish agriculture and claimed these measures could force the closure of many local farms. The Polish government has already in the past implemented bans on specific Ukrainian products like grain, citing the detrimental effects on domestic agriculture. While the government has expressed support for farmers' grievances, it is also balancing these concerns with the need to support Ukraine amidst the ongoing invasion. Also, Poland has excluded Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Hungary's ambassador from the opening event of its EU Council presidency on January 3rd. The decision follows Budapest's controversial move to grant political asylum to former Polish Deputy Justice Minister Marcin Romanowski, who is under investigation in Poland for alleged misuse of funds. Polish Deputy European Affairs Minister Magdalena Sobkowiak confirmed the exclusion, citing Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski's decision to withdraw the ambassador's invitation. Poland began its 6-month rotating presidency of the EU Council on January 1st and has prioritized security and pledged unwavering support for Ukraine during its term. Tusk's government has taken a decidedly pro-EU stance, in sharp contrast to Hungary's more isolationist policies. The Russian Federal Security Service has accused U.S. citizen Gene Spector of espionage, alleging that he provided biotechnological and biomedical information to the Pentagon to aid in developing a, quote, genetic screening system to target the Russian population specifically. The FSB claims that Spector acted on behalf of the Pentagon and a related commercial entity, gathering and transferring sensitive data, including classified state secrets. These accusations were detailed in an FSB statement quoted by Interfax. The case against Spector, which had not been publicly disclosed until recently, was tried in secret. Spector, a Russian-born former chairman of the Medpolymerprom Group, was first arrested in February 2020 for mediating a bribe involving Anastasia Alexeyeva, an aide to former Deputy Prime Minister Arkady Dvorkovich. He received a sentence of 3.5 years in prison and a fine of approximately $135 in September of 2022. In August 2023, while still incarcerated, Spector faced new charges of espionage. On December 24, 2024, the Moscow court convicted him and handed down a 15-year sentence in a high-security prison. The charges appear to be so dumb that no U.S. agency has responded with a comment. And the final item for this week, Russia and Ukraine have conducted a significant prisoner exchange, with at least 150 individuals from each side returning home for New Year's celebrations. The swap was partially mediated by the United Arab Emirates and marked the 11th exchange between the two nations this year. President Zelensky announced that 189 Ukrainians were brought back, including 87 army personnel, 43 members of the National Guard, 33 border guards, 24 Navy members, and 2 civilians. Among them, 14 were officers. The Russian Defense Ministry reported that 150 people from each side were exchanged, leaving an unexplained discrepancy in the reported numbers. Those sent back to Russia were prisoners captured during Ukraine's Kursk offensive, which began in late summer and led to Kyiv holding Russian territory. The offensive is aimed to secure leverage for potential negotiations and to also capture prisoners for future swaps. Many of the Ukrainians returned had been in captivity since the early days of the war. This exchange brings the total number of Ukrainian prisoners returned by Russia in 2024 to 1,358. However, many Ukrainians still remain in custody. Zelensky reiterated the commitment to freeing all captives and emphasized that no one would be forgotten. Accounts from returning Ukrainian prisoners detail harrowing experiences in captivity, including physical abuse, psychological intimidation, malnourishment, and medical neglect. Some have returned with severe injuries that required amputation. Reports of forced singing of the Russian national anthem and recitation of Russian poetry are part of a psychological torment faced by captives. And that's it for my news report this week. We will now move to the next segment.
So I think we had a couple more things we wanted to cover real quick. The first one was there was a news report coming out, a few news reports coming out about potential offensive, new offensive by Ukrainian forces in Kursk. As far as I know, like I'm definitely the last person to tell you about specifics, but my understanding is we asked the GeoInt people like if there's any validity to those rumors or to those stories, and they were basically saying yes, like it's legitimate. There's real stuff on the ground happening that indicates that's the case. So yeah, new Kursk offensive by Ukraine appears to be happening, but we don't have any specifics yet, and we'll definitely let you guys know if we find anything out. And then the other story, which I'll let my colleague here comment on, and then we'll jump to his report. I mentioned that a new armor was made by a metal company in Ukraine to protect the Patriot system. We just wanted to mention that all the images, like all of the news stories, said that it was to cover the Patriot system, but all of the images used by every separate news organization was of an Iris-T system having armor. So we don't know why that's the case. Like all we know is that that's what happened, right? Like they showed an image of an Iris-T and they said Patriot. We couldn't. If you asked me to speculate why, like maybe they don't want to show or don't have an image of the Patriot system, and that was the closest thing they had. But yeah, we just wanted to mention that because I think it was a bit confusing for some people. Mr. Germanet, do you have any comment on these two stories?
Yeah, first of all, sorry for the hot mic. Normally, our streaming platform mutes one automatically when the video is playing. Apparently, that's no longer the case. Didn't know. Sorry. And regarding the Iris-T SLM, so the press releases of both the initiative and the company who does the armor both said that it's about Patriot, and they provided one video and two images, and all of them are of this armor on an Iris-T SLM TOC. And so, yeah, I inquired with the company who produces this on the day the videos and the images came out, asked them if it's maybe a mistake, if they've done it for both. I probably won't get an answer, but maybe I will, and then we have certainly. And yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe they just confused Iris-T and Patriot. Who knows? Who knows, right?
Yeah, I would guess it seems like the Patriot thing is accurate and that the image is probably kind of some kind of red herring, but I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the press release of the company, I mean, I can link it if someone is interested. In the press release of the company, they say they have it on one system already operational and on one Patriot system, and that's the one they linked, that they showed the images and videos from, but it's not a Patriot, it's Iris-T. That's the confusing part about it, because when they wouldn't have included this, we have it on one particular system already running, then it would be fine, because then you can guess like, okay, it's for both, it's for Patriot and Iris-T. But yeah, maybe they're just confused, who knows. And hi Kobe, thanks for tuning in.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, just before I start my segment, I just want to point out that now, even that Kobe is here, which is great, that you maybe should get ready for the questions for the Q&A. So if anyone from our audience has some questions for us, please leave them already, because after that there's no segment planned. So when there are no questions, we would end the stream. Yeah, going to my segment. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine in a very short segment. We start with a donation by the German Federal Civil Protection Organization THW, which was made public on Monday. The THW has donated 4 Iveco technical vehicles worth over 300,000 euros to the Donetsk regional state administration. The vehicles will be used for road maintenance and to improve the capacity of the Donetsk Oblast Rescue Service. On Wednesday, it was reported that the German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern will help the Chernihiv Oblast with the construction of shelters in 5 educational institutions. If I recall correctly, it was 2 kindergartens and 3 schools. 250,000 euros have been made available for this purpose. Furthermore, around 20,000 euros will be provided also by the German state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern to improve the storage and digitalization of 100 paintings from the 16th to 20th of centuries from the Nizhyn Mykola Gogol University. What a name, in the Chernihiv Oblast. On Thursday, the German city of Singen has reported that they have donated a fully equipped ambulance to their Ukrainian twin city of Kobylyaki. The 7-year-old Mercedes-Benz Sprinter is in good condition and is equipped with a ventilator and a stretcher, among other things. So basically fully equipped. And last but not least, Sweden is providing 300 million Swedish krona as part of the German IIAD initiative, so the German Immediate Action on Air Defense initiative, which aims to strengthen Ukraine's air defense in the short term. The funds will go to Romania, which will be compensated for the donation of a MIM 104 Patriot fire unit that they have delivered last year. And yeah, that's my segment. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So I guess we'll start the Q&A. Mr. Colby, if I could maybe ask you, I've been reporting the last few weeks, the U.S. has been pretty steadily providing aid packages. As far as I understand, since December, it's about 6.5 billion in packages. But I'm still a bit confused because it comes from different sources and stuff. Basically, what is still on the table, and we have what, 20 a few more days, a little bit of a period before the new administration takes over. So how much realistically looks like it'll be left on the table, I guess, is my question.
Sure. So when we're talking about sort of the recent aid announcements coming out of the United States, I guess there's sort of 3 different buckets that we need to understand. So the first is the military aid stream, which of course is further divided into a few different buckets, which most of our audience is probably pretty familiar with already. One of the other buckets is sort of the economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, budgetary assistance, which has been appropriated through the supplementals. And I think that you mentioned during your news report that there was a disbursement of those funds, or the last remaining money from that, those appropriated funds in the 5th supplemental that the Treasury Department announced. So all of that money, as I understand it, is now out the door. And then you also have the money that's coming from the frozen Russian assets. So that's the $50 billion that sort of the G7 collectively agreed that they were going to provide to Ukraine. 20 billion of that is from the United States, and some of that money's flowing as well. All that money was basically put into a World Bank account, as I understand it, and then it gets dispersed through there. Other countries have their own mechanisms for how they want to provide that money and what that money can be used for. But the 20 billion from the United States, that's all sort of, again, non-military budgetary assistance that's being provided to Ukraine through the World Bank. So those are the 3 different sort of buckets that assistance is flowing to Ukraine from. For me, obviously, I just track really the military aid. I have never paid super close attention to any of the other financial or humanitarian economic assistance programs. Not something I've tracked. But for the military assistance, all of the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funding has now been tapped, according to the administration. So they announced a week ago, it was at the very end of December 30th, there was a a large package, both with those USAI funds. There's 1.2 billion in USAI, and there was 1.2 billion in a new drawdown package as well. So as far as the money is concerned, all those USAI funds are out the door. There's still a fairly large amount of drawdown authority remaining, and I know that the White House said that there still may be some more drawdown packages coming in the next 2 weeks, basically. Unclear how much more, but there's still several $1 billion left on the table in authority that could be tapped. But ultimately, even packages that had been announced some time ago, it takes a while for different things to actually be delivered. So even though they're announcing there's a $1.2 billion package, very little of that has probably arrived in Ukraine or even will arrive in Ukraine. So ultimately, it is up to the next administration to kind of make these decisions about what will continue to flow, whether they will continue to make new announcements or not. Still an open question to some degree. I'm not predicting any sort of doomsday scenario, as a lot of other people still are, but it is still somewhat of an open question. So this is why myself and others were raising the alarm a long time ago that the administration really should have been acting a little bit more expeditiously to get things out the door, rather than having to scramble here at the very last second to try and get Ukraine delivered all this badly needed material.
Okay, so I think that makes sense to me. Like, basically, you mentioned out of the 3 buckets, like 2 of the buckets are a done deal, like all the USAI money's out, and then the loan is done. But then the question of military aid, which has always been kind of the key issue, it seems like it looks like optimistically, it's a little bit fuzzy because, as you said, there's a difference between announcing something and getting it physically to Ukraine, and there's a question of like, once the new administration is in, like, they're going to be making all the decisions. So whether that, all the announcements follow through. So I think optimistically we can say probably a few $1 billion of presidential drawdown authority are going to be left on the table by the end of this. And like, not optimistically, or like the worst case scenario would be that some of these announcements that were made won't be done by the time the new administration takes over, and then for whatever reason they're not continued. But as you said, it's kind of an open question how it all shakes out.
Yeah, I mean, it's guaranteed that a lot of the things that the Biden administration is promising now are just not going to be delivered by the time the transition actually concludes and President Trump takes office and his administration takes over. There will be a lot of execute orders, as they're known, that are still in progress. So the new administration does have the ability, if they wanted to, they could pause those and not deliver the things that Biden promised, or they could just continue to do so. They could elect to not make any new announcements. They could continue to make new announcements. That it's all up to them. There's going to be drawdown authority left for them to use should they want to, and they will have to make a decision about the things that are already in progress in terms of the drawdowns, whether they want to continue to fulfill those execute orders. And I fully expect that the Department of Defense will just continue to do what they're already doing. They're not going to just wait for direction. They'll just continue to do what they're doing, because that's how things are supposed to work. The Department of Defense, doesn't just pause everything it's doing and wait for new direction. Pretty much everything continues. So there would have to be an affirmative directive made to stop execute orders. So in the absence of that, I fully expect that deliveries will continue. And I also expect that anything that's already on contract, there's pretty low probability in my view that contracts that are already signed would not be fulfilled either, especially if funds have already been dispersed to those awardees. I'm not super concerned about that being interrupted, but for any funds that have been committed but not obligated yet, that's more of a question, and that's why I've been making an awful lot of noise about that as well, that the Biden administration really needs to not be taking so long to get money obligated onto contracts after they've promised things to Ukraine, because this has been a huge problem since day one, that they will make some promise that Ukraine's going to get X. We're gonna spend money to buy them this capability, and then months later, there's still not even a contract signed for that. So that persists. And with this latest $1.2 billion in USAI funding, there was not a lot of details about exactly what that was going to be allocated for. And I have concerns, to say the least, that there's going to be an obligation of those funds in the next 2 weeks. So that's another thing where, the administration would have the opportunity to potentially not obligate those funds or obligate them to something else. So there is uncertainty ahead, obviously, to say the least. And just apologies for any background noise that people didn't hear in the background.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer. So yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see kind of the overall picture as it emerges over the next few weeks. Do we have any questions in chat? Hi, chat. Good to see everybody. We'll be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Well, we already have one question. That's for Colby, but we have one from last week, if you remember. There was a question towards the end which we couldn't answer, and Erden said, we're saving it and answer it next week. The question is, I'm not
The guy
really
who's
feeling.
not here promised that we'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. He made promises and now he's gone. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not feeling like answering this question. I don't think Joseph will. Colby, do you want me to just read the question and you decide for yourself if you can answer it?
I'm happy to give it my best shot. I have no idea what the question is, but you're welcome to ask anything, and I'll pass on it if I have nothing to say.
Okay, so last week's question was, when will NATO react to the hybrid attacks on coastal pipelines, especially cables connected to Europe? Why are any Russian shadow ships allowed in the Baltic Sea? How many cables are too many?
Well, it's not really up to NATO per se, because the way that the alliance works is that these attacks are against different individual members, right? They're happening in somebody's territorial waters, or I suppose some of them are happening maybe in international waters as well, but the assets are owned by somebody. So it's up to whoever the victim is in this case to make a determination about whether they feel like there is grounds to make any sort of invocation under the North Atlantic Treaty or not. And nobody's really taken that step so far. I think that really what ought to be done is just that, the individual actors in these situations just need to take more initiative on their own, because if it's punted over to, NATO needs to have a unified response. I mean, this is the problem with NATO, is like now you have to get 32 countries to agree to what that response is going to be, which is basically going to guarantee that there's not going to be a very satisfactory response, because achieving consensus is hard. So I think that Finland demonstrated some quite good initiative on this, the actions that they took, and that's kind of a model forward. And that if they take the initiative, then that's going to kind of prod some other actors into it basically forces everybody else to either come out in support of that or not. And so it kind of forces the hand of the less aggressive members. Aggressive isn't even the right word. I think people get what I'm saying. So there's obviously members of the alliance who are much more cautious in their approach to Russia still, and countries like Finland, the Baltic states, the ones that understand the Russians, they have different ideas about how this problem should be approached. So I think it's important for countries like Finland, Estonia, etc., Denmark, Sweden, the ones who have a lot at stake here, to show some leadership And I think that's probably the best way forward right now. As for the question of just like, allowing the Russians to do X, Y, and Z, I mean, Russian vessels still have a right to transit international waters. It's not that's not something that can really be dealt with short of an actual formal state of war existing, and then we're gonna sink any Russian flag vessel. So I don't see an easy solution for that. But in any situation in which there's Russian vessels, which there's reason to believe are engaged in this sort of activity, then it's incumbent on the member states involved who are being targeted by the Russians to respond. And if they feel like what the aggression against them has risen to the point where they can ask for Article 4 consultations, or even they want to invoke Article 5, that's a decision that their governments have to make. So I don't know, hopefully that made sense, and that kind of gets to what the person was asking. It might not be a fully satisfactory answer, but those are my my thoughts on that question, I guess.
Well, Kathy seems to be happy, so I guess it's a very good answer for her. I seem to see a lot of questions for Colby. I'm just feeling a little bit insulted by that.
Well, real quick,
Colby,
I mean,
yeah.
just like a couple other things. So I think there is, like Colby said, like multilateral response seems important here. There's not really a good NATO mechanism, but we have seen, I don't remember what it's called, but all the Baltic countries and Finland and Sweden like all agree to there's some kind of a multilateral organization where they said, hey, let's all start sharing information about these weird Russian ships and like reporting things to each other and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of like multilateralness happening on the ground, which is good to see. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about that is that so far it doesn't look like they've been super disruptive. So I think that so far countries have been willing to look aside for the most part. I think it's good, like Colby said, that Finland's been a bit more assertive here. But I think that it does look like Russia does have a few perks left in terms of like navigating international waters. As Colby said, like there's no way to completely cut them out of like the concept of having a right to international waters, but they still are allowed to dock at certain European ports and like things like that. And I think that like the more they kind of have horrible oil spills with like industrial contaminants they can't clean up, and the more that they like, ruin people's internet and stuff like that, like the perks are going to start going away. Their countries are going to find ways to retaliate. But I think Colby's right that so far no one is looking at some kind of a direct escalatory response. In other words, they're not saying, okay, Russia punched us in the nose, we're going to punch them back. They're thinking like, how can we get back at Russia that's not as escalatory? So there will be consequences for Russia, but they're going to be a little more indirect and a little more like, we don't want to start anything with Russia kind of stuff, in my opinion, until they do some real damage.
Yeah, I would just add that, to be clear, I mean, I'm very much in favor of having obviously a much more aggressive response against Russia. And, I'm definitely a proponent of the argument that, Russia's already directly at war with us. Even though we're, many of us are still in denial about this. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that we should, go into a full hot war with Russia, but I think that everything that they are doing to us, like we need to be at least having a conversation about doing the exact same things to them. I mean, if they're going to engage in hybrid war against us, then, that they should not be safe from those same actions. So the very least that we could do is actually implement like a real sanctions regime against Russia, which would mean like secondary sanctions on anybody that's still dealing with them. Like we need to really be moving in that direction. Like, yeah, we're not going to be able to cut Russian flagged vessels out of international waters, but we could say like, hey, any country that's accepting Russian flagged vessels into your ports, like you could be hit with sanctions. Like these are the conversations that we ought to be having. But obviously, there's still a huge number of people in Europe in particular that are just not interested in this at all. Obviously, the Biden administration as well has really not been interested in this. So we'll see now with the Trump administration coming in. They are going to be far less amenable to hearing out voices like Scholz and Starmer on these questions. So I think that it's very important that the Eastern Front members of the alliance kind of forge a new consensus with the United States on the question of how we're going to respond to Russian asymmetric warfare. And the easiest step that, not taking any kinetic action is just to really have a real sanctions regime in place to go after Russian interests around the world. And we're not going to have carve-outs for India or anybody else. Like, they will have to suffer severe consequences if they're still going to be engaging in economic transactions with the Russians.
Good. When nobody has anything to add to that, we will go to the next question from Thierry. For Colby, are heavy material at least promised to Ukraine? Bradleys, Strikers, tanks, M80s, or Abrams, Humvees, self-propelled guns, M777?
There's no tanks promised. I mean, there were additional Bradleys and Strikers promised in some past packages. And again, like, some of that stuff is not yet delivered, probably. Not all of it probably is delivered, so there's still more to come, but we're not talking about large quantities here. Self-propelled guns, I think that all of those are probably delivered. M777s all probably delivered, but we don't have great visibility into everything that's been promised through USAI. A lot of it's kind of vague, so it's hard to say how much is still in that delivery pipeline. But we definitely know there's no tanks promised beyond the 31 Abrams that were already delivered. So
Yeah, the vibe I got from a lot of those packages was that it was about sustainment, right? They would say things like, ammunition for this, for that, and then they would say, like, this will give Ukraine enough anti-air defense for the year, things like that, right? Like, or till the end of the year, they would say things like that. We're gonna, like, it was more about sustainment. That was the vibe I got from the packages, but there might have been a few specifics where they added some things.
Yeah, I mean, the USAI, a lot of it has been focused on ammunition and sustainment. I mean, there's been material pledged through it as well. But yes, I mean, a lot of it's just been focused on long-term fulfillment of spare parts and additional ammunition for the systems that have already gone. But there has been some, like, actual equipment material promised through those packages. But again, like, it's all long-term stuff, and none of it gets done. Maybe, I mean, it starts off just a lot slower than it needs to because the contracting has been so glacial, and then just it takes time to produce things, and none of that has been done really, or very little of it has been done with a mind to how do we actually spin up capacity, so that Ukraine is actually getting, like, really big quantities of things. There's that thinking has not really been at play with much of anything aside from artillery ammunition, which is obviously still, like, very modest targets were set. People can go back and look at my feed, and when I pointed out, where did the 100,000 shell per month target come from that the United States has? Well, Undersecretary LaPlante just pulled it out of the air. There was no actual analysis that went into determining that target. It was just a number that he grabbed. There's never really been any thought put into what Ukraine's actual requirements are and how the available funds and resources could be leveraged to fulfill those requirements. That's just not a thought process that has existed at any of the high levels of American decision making.
It's not the worst. I'm glad he made up a higher number. I wish he'd said 200, but
Yeah, regarding the heavy material, I actually have a question which is related to that, Kobe. You probably remember the cheetahs you bought from Jordan. Do you have any new information about them if they are being like fully delivered by now? Because the German side of the deliveries from the cheetahs is or was extremely delayed, at least officially, and the deliveries are still not completed yet. They will be completed in 2025, but not yet. And I wonder if the US share of the cheetahs is, if you have any news on that.
I have no idea. The Department of Defense has never published any information really on the fulfillment of those USAI packages. They leave it up to the Ukrainians to decide whether they want to announce when things arrive or not. As a general rule for everything, there has been some information published in the past on the fulfillment of drawdowns, not on a system by system basis, just like they have published some information about whether like a drawdown in its entirety has been fulfilled or not, or what percentage of it has been delivered. So we don't have any visibility into individual systems on a routine basis. I mean, you'll find there's many different bits and pieces of puzzles that you can find from different sources where individual people in the Department of Defense will make comments about what has been delivered, but there's no routine update of what is delivered and what is not delivered. It's just not information that they have ever published. They just, their policy is that the Ukrainians, will speak to that if they choose to when systems arrive in theater. So no, long answer. To make a long answer short, no, we do not know whether all of those cheetah self-propelled anti-aircraft guns from Jordan have been delivered to Ukraine or not.
Okay, thank you. Next question would be from Kellen, also for Colby. It takes months to get a defense contract signed. Is it reasonable to assume that US AI promised by Biden is just a fluff? Is there a way to expedite it?
Well, it's not fluff. I mean, it's real money that's buying real things. It just, it takes longer than it needs to. And part of this is that, the United States has federal acquisition regulations, and there's additional regulations for the Department of Defense on top of the federal acquisition regulations. So this is something that a lot of people need to understand, is that in the quest to stop like fraud and abuse of public funds, it has just created so much waste, vastly more waste than was actually being lost due to fraud or abuse of those public funds. So this is the problem, is that, like when you try and put in regulations and all these safeguards and checks and balances to make sure that public dollars are not being fraudulently expended and money's being given to people's buddies and whatnot, all of the processes that exist to try and prevent that just create waste, because the regulations are so cumbersome, the process is so protracted because of all these different requirements that exist to ensure that the money is being spent well. Well, the money just doesn't get spent well because of all those regulations. So that's part of it, is that there's just, it's too bureaucratic. That said, I mean, there were a lot of like exceptions and special authorities that were implemented into law to kind of give them flexibility to get around that. And still, like, a lot of it just happens very slowly. So, part of that is just like sort of inherent. But definitely part of that is just there has never been any sense of urgency. And the bigger problem, as I've said, is really just in the lack of prioritization about getting Ukraine what it actually needs. USAI has been treated as a fund that exists to finance the Department of Defense's own pet projects so that they can just send gimmicky things to Ukraine and figure out whether they are of interest to the DoD for its own requirements. So rather than using those funds to buy new Patriot fire units, which was, what basically all that money should have been used for, we get things like Switchblades and Phoenix Ghost and, just all these other make work projects for American companies that for things that Ukraine doesn't really need that badly relative to other things. Like Ukraine can make their own drones. They don't need drones from the United States. They need Patriots from the United States because nobody else makes Patriot. So that's really the most fundamental problem with USAI, beyond just that things are a little bit too slow. It's just what the money was spent on was just like near the bottom of what Ukraine actually needed from the United States.
Yeah, I just want to stress, like, we don't want to give anyone the impression that like USAI stuff is like empty promises or anything like that. It's more just like you can take that the gist of it as seriously, but when it comes to the outer boundaries of it or the specifics of it, there's a little bit up in the air. Like there's some procedural things where we couldn't say for certain that like all of it's going to get there for sure, right? I think that's more it. Like they're not empty promises, but also it's not just a completely iron-bound contract. Like there's some fuzzy borders on those promises. I would put it that way.
Okay. We have two more questions from just my profile name, fellow German. Both of them for Colby. With military aid completely assigned, at least in the books, Congress would need to approve a new aid package if Trump wants to support Ukraine with anything not yet promised by Biden?
For USAI, yes, because all those funds are now committed. As I said, they could change what they want to use those funds for if they're not yet obligated, and there's probably going to be at least $1 billion or more that's not yet obligated when Trump comes into office, so they could theoretically decide they want to spend that money on something else. But for the drawdowns, as I said, there's still going to be like several $1 billion worth of drawdown authority left. So that's a lot of equipment that can still be sent to Ukraine. Doesn't require anything new from Congress. They will be able to continue to tap that authority. And I don't know, it remains to be seen whether, I'd be getting ahead of myself by commenting on this, the issue of replacement funds, because that's another funding account that exists. And I don't know what the status of that is right now. So I'll just set that aside and say, yes, drawdowns can continue when Trump comes into office. He can announce new ones if he so decides to. So the material can continue to flow. But yes, there will need to be a 6th supplemental at some point in time, because what's left is not going to support Ukraine through the end of 2025. That remaining funds, I mean, they could stretch it to the end of the year, but it would be, we'd be back to the drip feeds of just like, $200 million, $200 million packages every couple of weeks or less, if they stretched it out. So there will need to be a 6th supplemental. They have some time to do that, and on that question, it's not that I'm concerned about a Ukraine supplemental passing. I'm right now I'm concerned about any legislation passing. It's going to be incredibly difficult for the House of Representatives to get legislation passed just because of the margin that Speaker Johnson has. So I'm not particularly concerned about Ukraine. I'm just concerned about everything. Like, I think that they're going to have a hard time just doing anything, including just the annual appropriations that the Department of Defense and the rest of the federal government still needs, because that's another really big problem, is that the Department of Defense overall is just very poorly positioned to be able to support Ukraine when they themselves are drowning, basically, because their available funds, their budget is just so anemic relative to the global threat picture that is facing the United States. So that's a huge problem, that I'm currently not like super optimistic about it getting solved. I think that, I can still, that this all said, I can imagine a scenario in my head, where there can be some sort of compromise on Ukraine assistance, because they can write, it doesn't even need to be a Ukraine bill. They can just have assistance for Ukraine in any piece of legislation, any appropriations legislation could have Ukraine assistance in there, and the word Ukraine does not even have to appear anywhere in that entire bill, because all they have to do is just increase the fiscal year 2025 drawdown cap up to whatever they want to, and they have to just appropriate additional funds for the replacement of defense articles that have been drawn down. So literally they just say section 506 FAA change $100 million to whatever, 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion, doesn't matter, whatever they come up with. And then they can have a appropriations line item that says X amount of dollars, 20 billion, 30 billion, 40 billion, 50 billion. This will need to be a very large number, because they're already in the hole, because Biden never asked for enough money, is appropriated for the replacement of defense articles and services that have been drawn down to U.S. allies, and just leave it at that. And then that's just inclusive of Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. So just with two line items in an appropriations act, you can continue to ensure that Ukraine will have the weapons that it needs, and the word Ukraine doesn't even need to appear in the bill. So that's the way that I would handle it in this Congress, because it just eliminates basically some of the political tension around it, and you don't even have to just like you don't even have to frame this clause as helping Ukraine. Just like the people that are smart will understand that's what it does, and the people that are dumb won't get it because they're dumb and they don't know what any of that means. It just looks like it's additional procurement dollars for the Department of Defense, which they obviously sorely need. So I could see that happening potentially as a way forward, because again, like it's not that Ukraine aid is in trouble, just like everything is in trouble. It's going to be hard for legislation to pass the House. The Senate, it's no problem. I wrote about this for Insider. People can go look at my column. I think it was the most recent column I did. I got into this a little bit at the end, that things in the Senate look quite positive for Ukraine, with Wicker chairing armed services and McConnell chairing SAC-D and Cotton chairing intelligence, Thune as majority leader. There would be no trouble getting, Ukraine aid passed through the Senate, but in the House, it's just all legislation is massively in doubt right now, just because of the margins involved and the challenges that the speaker is going to have getting his caucus on board with, or his conference on board with passing anything.
Okay, follow-up question also from just my profile name. Would you expect another long blocking of a new military aid package in Congress, or more responsibility, given that I don't know how to pronounce it.
Trifecta. Yeah, I just answered this question. So it's like I'm not concerned about Ukraine aid in particular. I'm concerned about any legislation passing the House right now. So, and only time will tell on that. I won't get into the conversations around what they're talking about doing with reconciliation and all that, because it's not really germane to our conversation here. Not at this stage, at least. I mean, when we have more of an idea of what is going to be in these packages, the reconciliation package that they're talking about doing, then we can we can talk about that in future Tochnyi broadcasts once we have some idea about what's in there and how it might impact Ukraine. But right now, it's just it doesn't look promising for the House getting much of anything accomplished, Ukraine related or not.
Yeah, like everything Colby said, I think is accurate. Like there's no special impediment to Ukraine getting any kind of aid or funding in Congress, but as Colby said, like there's just a really thin margins. We just saw the election of the new speaker, or the same speaker, and it was, as he said, like pretty difficult. And so it just means there's no special impediment to Ukraine, but it's not like we've historically had Congresses that are very unproductive in these scenarios. So they need to actually get work done in order to pass legislation to help Ukraine. So that's the part I think we're more concerned about versus like some special animosity towards Ukraine in Congress or something.
Good. Next question up from Paraendi. Is Ukraine better prepared, i.e. home-produced weapon systems, should USA aid cease?
No, there's some things that Ukrainian, like they can't produce in time, but there is something the Ukrainians are doing called what they call the Danish model. That was reported on a bit this week. They've got about $500 million so far from various European investors to like fund their arms industry. As far as I understand, they've mentioned they have about $1 to $2 billion in capacity, meaning like if European countries could and US, I guess, could put money into it, they could produce more stuff. They've got the capacity to do it. But yeah, I don't know. Ukraine is producing a lot. They put like half their budget into defense last year, but there's certain things like they can't make quickly and effectively, like just heavy weapons platforms that they still need. I don't know, Colby.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, there's obviously certain categories of weapons that Ukraine can't make their own. They're not going to get Patriots or Patriot missiles or Gimlers or anything else from anybody except for the United States. So for those things, that's the only option. For other things, obviously Ukraine's defense industry has grown quite substantially since the beginning of the war. So, I mean, relative to 2022, obviously Ukraine is, yes, better, has a more robust defense industrial base now than they did 3 years ago. But obviously not self-sufficient. As Joseph said, like they would benefit tremendously just from having more outside financing because they don't have the resources to even the Ukrainian government doesn't have the financial means to buy everything that their defense industry is currently capable of producing. So Europe really needs to take care of that because, as I said, the United States doesn't have any money available, additional money to kick in towards this. There was $800 million in a USAI package that was allocated for Ukraine's domestic drone industry, which is good because that allowed them to use some of their own budgetary resources that were initially going to that to reallocate that to missile programs, which is what their number one priority should have been from the outset. Ukraine has spent way too much money on drone programs that are not actually cost effective, to the detriment of domestic missile programs, which could be much more fruitful. And we're finally seeing some more news about some of those missile programs with the improved Neptune missile that they're working on, longer range, better surface to surface strike capability against land targets rather than naval targets. So a lot of those programs have been chronically starved of funding for a very long time. So getting more capital into Ukraine to help finance that kind of stuff would be very, very helpful. But ultimately, Ukraine is still going to need a lot of outside support, both from the United States and other donor countries, because Ukraine's got all these different systems from different countries, and all those systems still need additional ammunition. They still need spare parts, right? Like Ukraine doesn't make their own Iris-T missiles, for example. So that's something that it's entirely incumbent on Germany to make sure that they can make enough of those and deliver them to Ukraine, so that those missile batteries are not just sitting around with no ammunition available. So it's not just the U.S. Every donor country needs to continue to provide sustainment for the systems that they've already given, and then Ukraine definitely, we all want them to be more self-sufficient, and the best way that we can help that along is just provide more direct financing for those projects. So as Joseph said, what Denmark is doing is good, and what other there are other countries as well, obviously, that are contributing financially to support Ukraine's domestic industry, and through 2025, certainly that is something that should be looked to do more of that kind of thing.
Okay, next question up from Ozzy Buga. At Tochnyi, what is the situation regarding flights to Russia from EU? Same for overflight rights.
No clue.
You would probably know better than me, but my understanding is that European airspace was closed to Russian aircraft basically at the beginning of the war, and that has not changed. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, from my understanding, it's the situation like Kobe explained, and there are some very, very limited exceptions. There were like important political or medical flights, right, from Russian space to European one. There was I believe like a year ago or so, there were like 1 or 2 flights, like medical flights from Moscow to Germany, and yeah, but general is closed. Yeah, my understanding at least. Good.
I would say the
Yeah.
situation for Russian aviation is looking more dire now than it's looked since the beginning, just because they seem to be having increasing problems with the aircraft they have, which has been kind of obvious since the beginning. But as I mentioned this week, they had to shut down 5 airports because of drone attacks. They're probably just going to have to be regularly shutting down airports because of that. And then also they shot down like a friendly airliner, like for no reason other than being paranoid, right? And so I don't know, like that. It looks to me like their civilian airline industry is just so cooked, but maybe I'm just not thinking like a true Russian. But anyway.
Yeah, probably right. Don't worry. Next question would be from Kellen. She asked, for each panelist, what is your prediction for Ukraine in 2025? Just curious. Kobe, you want to start maybe?
That's too expansive for me. Sorry, I'm going to pass on that one.
I'll take a crack at it. So like, yeah, I think that this year we have both sides of the war reaching like a very, very close to their breaking point. I think that like Ukraine their resources are very strained. They're doing, I would say, I want to say the best they can, but I think in truth they probably could mobilize their society more on a government level to respond to what's going on. But that's my own opinion. But point is, they're doing quite a bit, and I think their society, we're seeing, I would say, for the first time, the war is having real tangible, the attrition is having real tangible effects on public opinion in Ukraine. There have been some swings in public opinion about openness to negotiations and things like that. So I'm not suggesting that like Ukraine's ready to give up or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that I think Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military are really stretched thin. And I think that's the same case for Russia as well. I think that Russia is reaching an economic crossroads where it's not that they're going to collapse or anything like that, but they're going to have to start making some really, really tough choices about prioritizing the military over other important things. And they're really starting to suffer. Certain key industries like coal and gas and oil and other basic things are really starting to suffer. Prices for basic foodstuffs are going up and up and up. So like Russian society too, it doesn't manifest as openly as it does in Ukraine, but Russian society too is really straining. And I think the Russian military, although it's can grind on, and unfortunately, they had a macabre, from a macabre standpoint, of productive year. Like they managed to put enough bodies into the grinder to gain some territory at the end of the day. But they are running out of people. Like to keep the grinder going, they have to pay tons and tons of money. They give these huge sign up bonuses. And also they have to they're running low on equipment. Like we have the GeoInt guys watching every day. We see entire depots being emptied out, and what they have left in a lot of these depots is pretty ragged, right? They're sending the best stuff obviously first, so what remains isn't great. So my point is, like, both sides are really stretched thin, and it does kind of look to me like it's a question of like who will break first, or who's going to blink first in the face of all of these pressures. And I mean, like, I I really I love Ukraine. I support Ukraine. I want Ukraine to win. But to me, it looks like the Russians just like they're an authoritarian country. Like I think they're going to stick this out. And so for me, it looks like there needs to be more external aid from other countries to help Ukraine to offset that problem. Like if nothing else changes, I think at the end of the day, Russia probably will grind out a very costly win unless the West gets serious about what's going on here. That's like my kind of general prediction, is like Ukraine is not going to collapse or lose, but like this year, they're very slowly, straining their resources more and more. And I don't know. That's kind of my general prediction. Like it's going to be a difficult year for both of them. And it's possible that some kind of settlement will be reached this year, but I don't think that's likely. But I think this will be a very decisive year. Like if one side or the other could manage to really hit one of these key pressure points in the right way, you really could see a cascade effect and have all these other problems like magnify. And then, either side could still like carve out a win here, in my opinion, depending on like the circumstances and depending on how external partners like China helping Russia or like Europe helping Ukraine, things like that.
Yeah.
Did I talk enough to get Colby to talk, or no?
I would just say that I broadly agree with most, if not all of that, I guess. I think you did a pretty good job kind of summarizing the state of play, but yeah.
I guess it's the highest compliment you can get from him.
Joseph. Yeah, I'll take it. I'm not going to push my luck.
Yeah, and my standpoint, I don't want to add anything regarding Ukraine from a Ukrainian standpoint, because I think just as Colby thinks, Joseph summarized everything very well. Just from a German standpoint regarding Ukraine, I don't think there will be in 2025, as you know. We will have elections in February. I don't think we will see any big increase in military assistance for Ukraine, although it would be much needed, regardless of whatever Trump does. Has nothing to do with him specifically. I think what we will see is like a Taurus delivery in late 2025, Q3, Q4. Friedrich Merz, in case he will win the election, so the CDU chancellor candidate, will have to do that because he urged the chancellor from the beginning to do it and demanded a delivery from day one, basically. And if he wouldn't do it now, it would completely ruin his credibility. Apart from that, there won't be anything big happening from Germany regarding deliveries. Everything is public as of now. Like there will be 20 howitzers, there will be 3 more IRIS-T SLM units, there will be 6 additional IRIS-T launchers for them. There will be around 100,000 rounds of artillery ammunition as of today. MRAPs, armored vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, at least 20. Some cheetah sparks will come, and 2 Skynex, and yeah, that's for military aid this year, which comes to my mind immediately. Yeah, next question, if nobody has anything to add, is I guess for Colby again. From just my profile name, could Trump do anything significantly with the drawdown money still available, e.g. at least many attackams or even cruise missiles?
Let's just, first of all, it's not money. It's just important to remember this. It's not money. It's just the authority to send things up to dollar value. So yes, there's several billion left in authority that can be used for anything, including attackams, including JASSM. I have no predictions about whether that's likely or not. It really depends on what the leadership at the Pentagon and elsewhere kind of is thinking on that question. The continued presence of Chairman Brown is highly problematic in this regard. So this is something that I'm quite concerned about, is that I believe it was the Army-Navy football game. President Trump and Chairman Brown reportedly, I think, spent time together there and were getting along well. So that's actually quite concerning, because I was hoping that he would fire Chairman Brown, because Chairman Brown is not very good at his job and has been a major impediment to getting assistance to Ukraine. He's a big advocate alongside Austin for doing the absolute minimum. So if Chairman Brown continues to have his position, that would be not good for Ukraine's prospects of receiving any increased quantity or decisive amount of military aid from the United States. But it could still happen. It just really depends on sort of what National Security Advisor Waltz's thinking is on this, where Rubio is on this question. I mean, in broad terms, I'm optimistic about them taking their roles, but I don't know whether they are going to like push hard on this question of getting Ukraine additional operational and strategic level strike weapons. But it is certainly possible.
Yeah, I think like Trump has put more people in the room than I expected that will be presumably saying like we should be giving Ukraine more aid and stopping Russia. So that's like a good sign, but we can't really say more than that. Like it's up to whatever the new president decides, like how all this is the same way. Like a lot of this stuff has been personally up to Biden until now. A lot of it's going to be personally up to Trump, and you know, that's just the way it goes. That's how the system works.
Thank you. So next question, also from just my profile name, would be for me at Gau. Did you hear any promises in German election campaigns about creating jobs in the defense sector? I haven't heard any so far, which is weird given the need for both jobs and defense. I'm not sure how they can like promise that directly. Maybe due to heavy investments, of course. Then defense companies would need to invest themselves and create jobs. I don't think there's anything just alone by the fact that I don't think anyone except the Greens with Robert Habeck has any or has made any public claims about where the money should actually come from for the defense in the next years. I know we have I know we a lot of politicians had said this is not how we want to do it and this is not how we want to do it, but most of them don't say how they want to do it. So they couldn't promise anything, or it would be empty promises. Yeah, that's my best answer, honestly, which is probably not that satisfying. Yeah. Does anybody see any other questions so far? I don't think there are any
There's a little like
more.
talk about F-16s. I don't know if we want to say anything about it in terms of like, I think someone asked like, are the F-16s, have we been given them like bum equipment for the F-16, something like that. I think the discussion in chat was like pretty good. Like they were mentioning like, well, the radars are kind of out of date. If everything we understand took place, then they never upgraded the radars on these things. And then, but I would say someone was saying like they're not super useful. I would disagree. Like I think as far as I understand, Ukraine has been dropping glide bombs on Russians with glee. With F-16s, and they use them. I don't know, want to say primarily, but a lot of what the F-16s do is defensive, right? They're defending Ukrainian airspace, and they're also shooting down like cruise missiles. But yeah, I don't know. I think so. I'll put it this way: I'm certainly no expert. I'm not even really an aviation guy, even on an amateur level. But like from what I heard the aviation guys saying, Ukraine has like slightly exceeded expectations in terms of integrating the F-16 into the situation that they face. Like it's no small feat to integrate a new aircraft platform into your Air Force to begin with, let alone in a span of like a year, let alone during wartime. So the fact that they've done that, the fact that maybe one rumored F-16 loss so far, like they haven't like lost that many of them, right? It's clear at least that much. Like overall, I think that it's going to take them a while to really get used to the platform and really like push it to its limits. But I think so far, like they've done a pretty good job, like all things considered, with the F-16 as a platform. And they've been getting like decent stuff to shoot on them, and they've been using them pretty effectively. They just need more of them, I would assume, but that comes down to like, can they maintain those? Do they have pilots for those? Blah, 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 right? Can they protect them? So it's not always simply a question of like, give them more airframes. Sometimes there needs to be some stuff that goes along with that. But Colby, do you have any thoughts? Anything you want to correct me on is probably worth doing.
No, I don't really have anything to add to that.
Good. Yeah, there's one more question. I don't know, Marino, how this question is meant. I'm just reading it. Does Ukraine have ways to reach the Chinese population? Do you mean like the total volume, or the total number, or how's this question meant? Because I don't know when
Yeah,
it's
well, I think the question probably is in the sense of like I mentioned before, like if Ukraine helps or if China helps Russia, like in other words, there are external. I just was saying that in a more abstract sense. Like it's hard. China's relationship to this whole thing is kind of complicated. But that was like one of the things I mentioned was like if China decided to help Russia externally and like bail them out of their problem, then that would be really bad for Ukraine, right? I was just saying like an outside actor could really swing things in this scenario. But like I would say generally, I think the question is like, does in that case, if Chinese influence could have an effect, like, is there anything Ukraine can do to, I think the question is like reach the Chinese population. I would say that we're balking at the premise of the question because we don't think the Chinese population has much say in Chinese policy towards Ukraine, right? In other words, what the Chinese people think about Ukraine obviously has like an indirect role, but at the end of the day, the Chinese Communist Party has a certain position on this whole thing. And, I'm certainly no expert on the matter, but I think their position can be summarized as they want to help Russia as much as possible. They see it as in their interest to like undermine the international world order led by the United States right now, but they don't want to actually risk anything. They're not willing to put any serious economic or political benefits that they have, or capital that they have on the line to actually see that put forward. So what that means is they'll help as much as we kind of allow them to help, and also we are a bit we need to strategize carefully about what is non-negotiable for us, because at a certain point they might change their mind about that approach. If we turn the screws too tight, they could just say, well, screw it, we'll back Russia, right? So in other words, we need to we don't want to just let them get away with whatever they want, because then they will do whatever they want. But we also don't want to like turn the screws so tight that they completely change their policy. So I don't know, like I think so far, like China hasn't gotten directly involved. The U.S. has said some kind of concerning things about it, but they've never been specific enough for me to really make any definitive judgment on. Like they'll say, like you'll just have Secretary Blinken say, "Oh, well, the Chinese have been helping the Russians a lot," and you're like, "Well, how?" It's a tricky situation as far as what can Ukraine do in that circumstance. There are certainly some Chinese firms that have very good Ukrainian customers. Of that, I'm sure. They are getting a lot of components and things for weapons and stuff like that, just keeping everything working on the front lines, right? You don't just need a lot of military equipment. You need a lot of regular equipment to make a war work, and a lot of that stuff just happens to come from China. So I think that they have some commercial relations, but at the end of the day, I think Ukraine has had some discussions with China. I don't think China is completely against having a relationship with Ukraine. They haven't demonstrated any kind of public animosity towards Ukraine. And I think what China is interested in at the end of the day is the Ukrainians are very good at making engines, and the Chinese have a reputation for sucking at making engines. They've been copying the Russians for decades, and they haven't even managed to achieve what Russia has in terms of engine technology. And I would say the Ukrainians are even a bit more clever than the Russians. So that's something China looks at and goes, "Hey, these Ukrainians are kind of interesting." So I don't think they are interested in completely siding with Russia at the end of the day, but there's not a whole lot Ukraine can do aside from sharing crucial jet technology that China would really be compelled to change their behavior either. So, it's something that Ukraine has to kind of deal with. I think they've been pretty smart about it so far, but there's not a lot they can do, in my opinion.
Good. Yeah. He also replied in the comments in terms of information warfare. Just for information. And sorry, Marino, my stupid head was does Ukraine able to also get 1 billion people in the country? And I'm like, huh? But yeah, totally misunderstood the question. And there's one more. It's about F-16s again. Kobe, I don't know if you want to answer these questions anymore, because I get asked every stream at least 2 questions about F-16s.
You're welcome to ask it.
Okay. Why was Ukraine so keen on getting specifically F-16s when they only get old ones at very low delivery pace? Wouldn't, e.g., FA-18 Super Hornets be a better fit, and Boeing really needs some orders?
I will answer this, but I do have to say, I'm not trying to be mean, I really struggle as to why we're still getting these questions, because I feel like John and myself have explained this 1 million times, and I don't know why it's hard for people, because we really have explained it 1 million times. So there are very few Super Hornets around that are available. Australia operates the Super Hornet, Kuwait operates the Super Hornet, and the US Navy operates the Super Hornet. So who's going to give Ukraine Super Hornets? The Australians, yeah, they can divest those maybe, I guess. Or I think they may have already even divested them. Kuwait, they're keeping theirs. They're still continue to get regular sustainment for them. I've seen them countless contracts or solicitations lately, actually, for Kuwait's aircraft fleet. So those are not going anywhere. And the U.S. Navy is still planning on flying those Super Hornets for a considerable period of time, because the U.S. Navy has not ordered very many F-35s at all. So there's really hardly any Super Hornets that were available that could conceivably be given to Ukraine. The F-16, on the other hand, is extremely ubiquitous. There were numerous countries that were in a position to provide those airframes to Ukraine. It's a much easier airframe for them to operate, maintain, sustain, for us to sustain for them. because it has such a wide international customer base. There's such a wide array of private sector support available for that airframe. Boeing absolutely does not need more orders for the Super Hornet. They don't want more orders for the Super Hornet. They want to shut the production line down. The Department of Defense wants to shut the production line down because they want to transition all their resources to the Eagle 2. So there's no reason why Ukraine should be getting any other aircraft. The F-16 was always the correct answer to their needs, to just get them operating one airframe that we can sustain, help them sustain, because they just don't have the bandwidth to be flying a bunch of different airframes. And, I know the French are doing the Mirage and all that, but I mean, really, it's all kind of a distraction from what they should be focusing on, because they just have such limited resources, and they're not in a position to be having a wide array of different aircraft with different sustainment requirements, different parts that they need. It just adds complexity to a country that can't afford to have that complexity. They just need to keep it simple so that they're not wasting resources that could be allocated elsewhere. So F-16 was always the correct option. The failure was just that Biden was not willing to sign off on it until like a year and a half into the war, and there was no effort made to upgrade the airframes with new radars. Those were the two big failings, but otherwise F-16 was always the correct course of action. It just, as usual, took way too long to get there, and it's being done half-assed.
Yeah, and the Swedes offered Ukraine Gripen, and they basically said like, thanks, but we need to focus on like a single airframe, something to that effect. So what Colby's saying is not just like speculation on our part, which it should be pretty obvious that like maintaining an airframe is expensive and difficult. But Ukraine has basically said as much. Like, I think the Gripen would probably be nice to have for them. They need airframes, but they basically said we can't handle a Mirage and a Gripen and an F-16. So it's pretty likely that that's a big reason why they're it's better to get them on F-16, because it's as you said, widely available airframe, and also there's one answer here. I don't know. as with Colby, I'm a bit surprised anyone, like, I think that it's a real success story of that it should have happened sooner with this whole thing. And I think one of the reasons people are so like open to speculation about Ukrainian aircraft is because it took so long, right? Like because it took forever for F-16s, people were like, what about Super Tucanos, right? Like we were constantly coming up with crazy answers because the one answer wasn't happening. But anyway.
Yeah, and just for the archives, Ukraine also rejected the German Tornado. Not that we have offered them, but they specifically said they don't want them. So yeah, just for the archives.
But I stand by that if Ukraine had the A-10, they would have already won the war, and then I make airplane noises and they shoot the whole convoy, and I'm happy.
Okay. Good. Do we have any other questions? I feel like there was one more, but I'm not seeing anything right now. No. I think we're at the end, Joseph. Oh no, there's one. Sorry. I don't know who wants to answer that, but at Tochnyi, does the Ukrainian advance in Sucha have anything to do with the gas pipelines running through there to kind of enforce the end of the gas contracts? Any ideas on that?
No, it's all for us. Like my understanding, again, I'm not made aware of really much goings on the ground, but like my general understanding about the various Ukrainian offensives is that we really have a hard time understanding what like the goals behind them, and not in like a negative way, but just like it's not totally clear to us what the objectives of these various offensives have been. And so, yeah, it's hard for us to say strategically what they're trying to do with offensive, X, Y, or Z. That's like my general impression from the GeoInt guys.
Yeah, I completely agree with you 100%. So yeah, when nobody else has anything to ask or want to say, Joseph, do you want to moderate the end?
Yeah. Like, I don't know, like, just a little addendum to this. Like, with Russia, it seems kind of obvious, like, oh, they want to take Pokrovsk, right? Like, with Ukraine, it seems like the guys are a little more confused about, like, what, not in a bad way, just like they're clearly doing an offensive in Kursk, but what the objectives are, like, what the motivation behind it is, aside from, we know, they probably thought there was some kind of attack going on Sumy, or at least, like, Sumy was getting shelled a lot, so they decided, like, screw this. They clearly wanted, like, prisoners and stuff. There's some obvious strategic motivations, but in terms of, like, why that spot, why these areas that they were advancing into, like, that's always hard to say. Cool. So yeah, thanks everyone for all the questions. We always do appreciate it, even though sometimes the panel gets irritated by questions. We still we do appreciate all the questions. It's good for us to know that it's still a question for some people. So yeah, thanks always for participating in the Q&A live chat. We always appreciate it, guys. Thanks, of course, to our panel. Thanks, Colby, for stopping in. Really appreciate it. It would have been a real tough for me in German aid to Ukraine to answer all those difficult questions. So thanks so much for coming on. Thank you, Mr. German aid to Ukraine, for moderating the Q&A and for running the broadcast this week. Appreciate it. And thanks, of course, to the audience tuning in later for the pre-recorded or for the recorded stream, the VOD, as it's called. So thanks, everyone. Do check out our website, tochnyi.info. It's got lots of great research and papers and maps and cool stuff like that. Do check out our channel for all of our content. Subscribe, like the stream. We always appreciate that stuff. And yeah, we'll see everyone next Sunday, just like we do every Sunday at 2100 Kyiv time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava. And of course, also thanks to Joseph, because nobody else has it, for the great moderation of today's stream.
Oh, thanks to me.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye, guys.
On behalf of the brave.